What's up, guys? This is Phil Galfond from RunItOnce.com, and today I'm going to be playing some 1-2 Zoom PLO live with commentary. For my last couple of Essential videos, I've been doing pre-recorded stuff, which I think is nice because you get into more detail. But I also think that there's a lot to be said for playing and talking in real time. Loose defend on the top left and loose open on the bottom left. I'm probably until I get a better feel for the player pool, or rather until they prove otherwise. I'm going to assume that they're going to under-defend against my 2.33x open, and we'll be opening probably all my buttons. I'll be opening pretty loose in general, and or at least from button and cutoff. From early position. So what I tend to find in smaller stakes games, not that 1-2 is that small, but I find that people will be less positionally aware, and especially when it comes to defending, they'll kind of defend their defending ranges similarly, whether you're opening from early mid position or late position. So we raise and call 3-bet on the bottom left table. Godlike Roy I know is a good player, so I don't know if he's checking back to fold that often. That said, I have a pretty good hand to be betting with, so I will do so. Bottom left table, it's a very interesting spot. I'm going to bet for mostly for protection. When he checks back King 7-5, he can definitely have aces, but if he does have aces, my equity is not that terrible. I also don't really want to put myself in a situation where I check call the turn and turn my hand kind of face up, cap my range. I think people will play far too weakly against the line that I took, and even if I check the river, I don't think people will bet like value bet and bluff with impunity because they fear the check raise. I find that when you take a check call line on the turn, people are much more likely to assume that you're capped, so that when you check the river again, which is what you're usually going to do in that situation, they just do a lot better job of value betting thinly and bluffing, whereas when you've bet the turn, they call. Now they're the ones with the cap range on the turn, and you can have anything. And even if you do check the river, regardless of what hits, you can always be going for the check raise. Whereas, especially on rivers which don't change the board, once you've check called the turn, they're not going to expect you to check raise. So I think they play a lot tougher in those instances. I'm going to go with small C bets on both these tables. I think that as a default strategy in a lot of these spots, it'll work fairly well. I really like doing it in multi-way pots on paired boards. I think people just play very weak, and they're kind of forced to because the first player has to worry not only about your range, but about the player behind him. I'm going to make a large bet on this turn for a couple reasons. First of all, I want him to fold queens, and also he can have a lot of club flush draws that he plays this way, because he's probably not going to check raise them on the flop, and what else is he going to do with them when I give him that good of a price? So I think I have a lot of immediate fold equity in that spot. Here I get raised. I have the King of Hearts, which is not super relevant, except that it means he doesn't have it. I think this is a fold against any reasonable range, and if I was facing somebody who was playing an unreasonable range, then I perhaps made a bad fold. Meanwhile, top left could go either way. I'm actually going to check back for deception, pot control. Also, really, when you bet with a weak 2-pair hand, oftentimes the hands that they fold have very little equity against you. That's a little less true with bottom 2-pair, whereas if I had like Jack 5, a lot of the hands that he's folding have very, very little equity anyways. So I don't mind giving them a free card. My hand doesn't need as much protection against the range that is going to fold. I hope that made sense while I was talking through these other hands. Meanwhile, here I do get check raised, unfortunately. I think I've taken 2+ EV stabs of that pot, and I can't continue. And I definitely think that my range is susceptible to being bluff raised in that spot, or I think so. I mean, I know so, especially when I'm playing in smaller games or with somebody who I don't think is quite as good. I don't think anything about this person. I've never played with them to my recollection. So if that's you, it's not that I don't think you're good. Instead, I'll just make assumptions about the player pool, that people are a little bit weaker in spots like this, and but certainly my range here is really, really weak, and it includes Actually, when I when I size up on the turn there, it includes a whole lot of bluffs, um, and I'm very susceptible to his raise. There's 66 in the pot, and he makes it 75, so he's laying himself an okay price, and it's definitely profitable against the way that I know I would play my range. But it's a risk you take when you attempt to exploit other players' tendencies, as you leave yourself pretty exploitable in the process, and that's something that I know a lot of players are not okay with. It makes them feel too uneasy. It's something I'm definitely okay with, and I kind of trust myself to, in those spots, make more good decisions or judge the situation correctly more often than not. And by that I mean, usually I'll be the one exploiting them with my very exploitable strategy, and occasionally they'll be the one exploiting me. I could have done some things on that top right table, but I'm in the middle of talking, and I think my play was relatively standard. I think pretty easy check down here. When so many draws miss, I don't think I'm going to make him fold a better hand often at all. Do have, a reasonable amount of showdown value as well. But what I was saying, I think especially when you're playing in softer games, and again, I know I'm making a lot of assumptions about the 1-2 Zoom player pool. I do realize it's not a walk in the park by any means. But it's all the more reason to, I guess, when you do find the players who are weaker, whether it be that they are, players that don't really understand what they're doing in poker, or just regulars who play kind of very straightforward style and play their hands, or just generally weak, tight regulars. I think that if you're not attempting to exploit them and just trying to play a balanced style, I think you're just leaving a lot of money on the table. And in lower stakes games, especially where the rake's high, and there are still plenty of good pros, you really need to be maximizing against the weaker pros. So I'm going to pot here. He has a little over 2x pot left, and I think it's just going to be the most effective way to play that hand. It's not a situation where I think that if I bet smaller, he's going to make a massive mistake by calling with whatever he was going to call with. On this turn, equities, I am kind of in a way ahead, way behind situation, but I'm out of time there. But the pot is such that, I'm certainly not folding, and I don't really think I accomplished too much by giving him a better price. I don't think he's going to stack off with, a lot of hands that are a big mistake. I'm going to try to slow things down a little by folding and watching, because I know we're talking about a lot of things. But yeah, the main thing that I've been talking about, and I'll try to wrap up soon, is that I generally will trust myself to identify the spots where I'm making an exploitative and exploitable adjustment against someone who I think it will work more often against. And it is definitely true that sometimes by doing so, I'm going to make some mistakes, and I'm going to let some people very seriously exploit me in some cases if they can figure out exactly what I'm doing. But just like anything, where like in a situation where you're calling the river against a range, and you're pretty confident it's a call against their betting range with your pot odds and everything else. This hand we'll talk about after. And actually, I should have bet a little bit bigger. But in a situation where you're calling against their range, and you end up being wrong that time, that's okay, because you were making a plus EV call, presumably, against their entire range. And it's kind of the same thing when you adjust to a player, because what you're really doing is you're playing against one player, this guy, who I don't know, but he's really a range of players. He could be, I guess I'll just sit out for a second while I talk, because I'm obviously timing out everywhere. You're playing against a range of players, and people don't really like to use. People don't take that step to use kind of the same terminology, range of players, range of hands, but all the concepts carry over. Really, you're playing against. This is a person in the 1-2 Zoom pool. Who over 9 hands is 21-11. Like, the more information you gain, the narrower the range becomes. This is nothing so far, but a 9-hand sample. But You could look at, where he's from. He's Russian. You could see how many tables he's playing, things like that, and it kind of narrows the range of players you're playing against, or the type of player that he could be within that range. But you have to choose the most plus EV line against that range of players, and what that means is sometimes you're going to choose a line that's very negative EV against that particular player. And I oftentimes hear people, and I'm probably guilty of saying it too. I'm actually going to make a tight fold here just because I don't really think it could go well for me unless he's just like pure bluffing and going to give up. But anything that he's going with, I'm doing very poorly against that range. And there's no turn I'm looking for other than a 9, and even that, doesn't necessarily give me the nuts. There's a hand here that I said I would talk about, but have not yet. Okay, that one. What I'm saying, yeah, so something that a lot of people do, and I'm probably guilty of as well, is, and you'll see it in video making a lot, they'll be in a spot, and they'll have to make, or be considering, like a hero call, or a hero bluff, or something of that nature, or a flop check raise, and they'll say, I might do something like this if I knew a little bit more about him, but I don't know anything, so I'll just, wait. I'll just wait and give up the spot. And if what they mean is this is a spot where against a specific type of player I would make this play, but against the average player I wouldn't, then sure, thumbs up. I approve of that. But if what they mean is I'm not sure what type of player this is, I think this play would be good against the average player, but I'm afraid to make an assumption and be wrong, then I think that's them making a mistake, because they are a range of players, and you have to trust your judgment, because that's what's gotten you to where you are, wherever you are in your poker career. But you have to trust your ability to identify a situation as a profitable bluff against the average player that this player could be. This hand on the bottom, well, what's now on the bottom right, I raised and bet twice and gave up on the river. I think my bet size on the turn should be a little bit larger, but basically, sure, he has a king a reasonable percentage of the time. I also don't think I have a ton of flop fold equity, but I don't mind building a pot with a nut flush draw. Up here on the top left, this is a hand that some people would never consider folding. I think it's something you can consider certainly, and I would not be surprised if it's actually a reasonably large mistake to call. I'm going to assume that I can maneuver post-flop well enough to play this hand in a three-way pot, but I think it's something worth talking about because I know some players that feel it's a huge mistake, or actually not many that feel it's a huge mistake, but some that never defend this, and some that defend hands in this spot to a cold 3-bet much worse than this hand. Let's start by leading out. I think if I shove and he reshoves and this guy has dry aces, we can make him fold, and then we can get it in like decent-ish against his range. I don't think I accomplished much by checking there. Occasionally it checks through the times that I was going to get two folds like that, which is, that was a fantastic result for me. Had it checked through instead, that would be a disaster. And if it goes shove or pot reshove, then I am in a very difficult spot, but we need to run some equities, but I don't know if I could get away with folding that hand, so it's not as if checking gives me enough information to make up for what I lose when it checks around. This hand you can go either way with, 3-betting or calling. I'm going to call. I think it plays a little bit better that way. But yeah, on the bottom right table, basically, flop c-bet. I don't think I have a lot of fold equity on the flop. This flop does pretty well for his cold calling range, but I don't mind building a pot with a nut flush draw and keeping my range more uncapped, whereas if I were to check call, which is the other alternative, I think check raising is a little bit suicidal against most players. But if I were to check call, then he's the one that gets to bet this turn and make my draws fold, whereas when the king pairs, sure, he has a king a lot, but I still have some equity against the king, and the time that he doesn't have a king, like Jack 7 is in a hard spot, Jack 10, 9, 8, Queen 10, Queen 9, 8 with clubs, things like that. A lot of hands that I can make fold when the board pairs there. I'm going to need to... Alright, I'm going to sit out at this table next hand. I'm going to try to refresh my tables and get some more time bank. Here, second to last to act. I actually already forgot. This guy was the 3-better, and he's already checked, which is a little surprising. He might just have dry aces and be making a pretty responsible check fold, I guess I'll call it. Probably with dry aces, you can check fold in this spot, even with the pot so large, just because you're never getting all these players to fold, and very often somebody will have you in pretty bad shape. Queen Jack 10-5, I believe I timed out on the flop in a 3-way pot. Went bet, fold, call on the turn, which is pretty standard, and then I time out on the river. But I was going to check back in this spot. I'm going to pause the video for a second and get some new tables, so we can talk a little bit more. All right, here we go. I'll do my best to sit out next hand on some tables when a lot of things are going on, which is probably going to happen a lot. Perhaps I would have been better off with a 2-tabling video, but I feel okay. Anyways, this hand we talked through, and I think that his so what I didn't say is my turn bet, which was I think 17 into 27 roughly, was too small. Okay, so 29, and I bet 17, 20. I think I should bet like 22 here to give me a much better chance of making his like Jack 10-9 with clubs, or just like Jack 10-9-8 fold, because I think against a larger bet sizing is a very easy fold when I give him this good of a price, which I kind of did because I was timing out. Then yeah, I think he potentially can call with a lot of those hands that I would really, really like him to fold. But regardless of my bet size, I mean, had I bet what I wanted to, I'd feel more confident, but still I feel pretty confident on the river that his range is very King X heavy. Add that to the fact that he's not even necessarily going to fold a hand like Queen Jack here, Queen Jack with a missed draw, because of all the draws that missed. So I think it's a very easy non-bluff against the majority of opponents, or in going with the theme of the video, against the average opponent that you'll run into. Top right, called a raise and called flop. Checked through on the turn, and he's betting river. I don't think this is a way that people bluff very frequently. So I would like to fold. I'm very high up in my range when I don't bet the turn. I'm basically capped at nut flush. Very rarely will have a boat after checking back the turn. Very rarely will have a boat in the first place. So for that reason, you might feel a little compelled to call, and I do feel a little bit compelled to. But again, especially since this is the theme of the video, I'm going to trust my intuition there and fold in a spot where I just don't think people take that line as a bluff. Another thing that kind of goes in my favor, I guess, with that fold is that a lot of his hands, a lot of the hands that he would choose to bluff with are like the ace of hearts without another heart, maybe the king of hearts without another heart. And opening from early position, usually he's going to have like his ace and his king, especially his ace, will more often than not be suited. And if it's not, it's a lot more likely that he has like an ace-ace or king-king type hand, which on a board like this, sure, it actually doesn't really have showdown value unless I have 7-6. But a lot of people feel that it does have showdown value, or even if they wouldn't say it out loud if you ask them. They don't like to turn a hand that strong into a bluff. So for that reason, yeah, I think this is probably a good fold. Defend with a weak ace, with a little bit of connectivity in the big blind, and have a very easy flop check call. I think that check raising is definitely overplaying my hand. And we will continue to check call. We pick up a gutter on the turn. One thing that some people might wonder about this queen-queen 3-3 hand is why I didn't 3-bet it. It's a hand that I would always 3-bet out of the blinds. However, in position, you face a lot more 4-bets, both by the initial opener and the blinds. And I think it would be a pretty big... It would be very unfortunate. I won't call it a disaster, because I overuse that word when I make videos. But it would be unfortunate to get 4-bet with this hand, which plays so well in single raised or 3-bet pots, but not so well in 4-bet pots. So for that reason, to clarify, and I have talked about this before, I believe, maybe though in an elite video. I'm going to probably make a tight fold up here on the top left. He check back flop, I bet turn. People don't really take this line as a bluff as well too often, so I will let it go. Flop's been checked around here on the top right, and his weak bet size in addition to, you know, my extra equity, I'm just going to go for a semi-bluff. It just can't be that bad with all the equity that I have. And in addition to that, I just think that his bet's showing a lot of weakness, so I think I can make him fold. I also think actually his bet is makes him very draw heavy. So I don't know if on a brick river I would turn my 9s into a bluff. I might even check them down, but I would think I'd have a lot of success turning them into a bluff. So now it's interesting because we did assume his range was very draw heavy, and now we've hit our 10 high flush and he's betting into us. I think probably this hand's a little bit too strong to fold. There's just enough chance that he has like King X of diamonds and is like, oh, well, I missed my flush, I'll bluff the spade flush, so I think I will call. So he did have the combo draw of sorts. He had the 6 and the gutter and the nut diamonds. By no means was that call like, I know that I'm going to be right. It was, I think I'll be right more than often enough to call that hand. In addition to the fact that, you know, I guess actually the theme of this video has been kind of ignoring balance and worrying about where you're at in your range, but really I'm very high up in my range with this hand. And in addition to being high up in my range, I have 2 blockers to his combo draws with spades, which is certainly very relevant. Yeah, he's too good to make this a 3-bet, I think. I don't know these players. Sometimes you're going to get a lot of value against some weaker ranges that are calling here. But in this case, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to get value. I'm going to go for the check raise here. I don't think it's going to work very often, but I also don't think a bet is going to go well for me very often. I'm talking about the bottom left now where I rivered my boat. I think if I bet, especially blocking the 2 kings, most of his calls are going to be flushes. And I think I can get him to bet his flushes anyways. So I think I might as well go for the check raise. I don't want to make it too big. And again, you know, exploitatively. Because I think, you know, I want to make sure that he calls with like a nut flush very often. Not that, you know, it makes a difference. I'm obviously repping a boat. But I just think that the smaller raise gets called significantly more often. Not that that was that small of a raise. It was about 3x. Gets called significantly more often than a larger one in that spot. Anything else to say about the bottom right table? No, I don't think so. Queen 9 6 4. Probably. So against a strong player, especially who's going to 4-bet a lot. Oh, that was what I was trying to say about my double-suited queens, is that people tend to 4-bet a lot more out of position than in position. And I'm one of those people. I think it's correct to do so. He's just watching my video. He probably knows that I 3-bet junky hands like this in position. I probably should have bet this turn on the top right. I am a little distracted by making the video. Just bringing the straight. Sure, he can have a straight sometimes, and my equity is terrible. But because of the presence of the straight, all of his 1-pair hands, I think, are going to fold. Because their 2-pair outs are now dead the times that I do have a straight. I also block no spades, so I just don't let him draw for free with his flush draws, which are that much more likely when I do have the spades. So I think I made a mistake checking this turn. It didn't come back to bite me. And we're going to go with this hand on the bottom left. It just can't be bad. And I think it plays much better than doing anything else. I think checking back doesn't accomplish all that much. We have a hand that plays very well against pretty much any range on the flop. However, when we check back, when we hit our 9 high flush, it's not as if we have excellent implied odds. When we hit our 6, so we have queens and 6s, or queens and 4s, we don't have a very excellent hand that, you know, we have great implied odds on, especially because it brings a straight, which will slow him down with his worse hands than ours. So whenever you're, I mean, this is a kind of a standard bet, I would assume, for most of you. But as a general guideline, when you're considering close spots, whether to put extra money in on the flop or to wait until later streets, what you need to consider mostly, I think, is the playability on future streets, and whether when you do hit your outs you're going to get paid, or it's going to put you in kind of an ugly spot. probably just start with a c-bet as a default. I know I've been playing, especially while talking a little bit, I've been playing kind of a straightforward raise and c-bet strategy. But I also think it's going to work pretty well against the majority of players. You'll also notice that I'm keeping my 2.33x open from all positions. This is something that I think is probably not best. It's definitely easiest. But I don't think that you're giving up that much by doing so. I think that pre-flop sizing with opens, I don't know, as time's gone on, people are convincing me as people's strategies have changed, I think that there's more to it than there used to be. I think that people used to fold so much that, when you open smaller and therefore, don't get as much money into the pot with your stronger range, sure, you slightly lose, with your strong hands, but you gain with your big hands. But as players start to not fold the big blind, it becomes more of a mistake to not get maximum value with the range you're opening, because you're also going to want to open a tighter range if you have no pre-flop fold equity, if you're not going to be stealing the blinds. Start with the bet up here on the top right. I size down. I think that sizing down in multi-way pots is something that's going to work very well if you just experiment with it. The player in the middle is kind of handcuffed because of the other player in the pot. Especially in four-way pots, you have two of them handcuffed, and then it comes down to the last player who can potentially make a move. But, yeah, the fact of the matter is there's not a ton that they can do about it if they're the players in the middle, because they have multiple ranges to worry about. So even if they think that your bet sizing is a little bit weaker, they can't just go bananas raising you, because there are some pretty severe consequences, especially if they have no relevant blockers, because then it's just, very reasonably likely they run into a big hand behind you. I do think it's important, if you're in a multi-way pot, to identify the different types of situations in which people check. So for example, if two players check and then the pre-flop raiser checks and you're next to act, it's not as good of a bluff spot as if the pre-flop raiser checks, then two other players check, and then you have a chance to bet. Because in the second scenario, once the pre-flop raiser has shown weakness and nobody else decided to bet, everybody's range gets weakened quite a bit. In the first scenario, the pre-flop raiser opted not to c-bet, so you get a little bit of information there, but the first two players just checked to the pre-flop raiser. And I think that this is kind of an iffy bluff with no blockers. I think since he check called, I think actually he's reasonably likely to have it, so I'm not going to fire off a bluff. It's interesting to me, I didn't expect him to check call flop as the pre-flop open limper, although I guess that statement makes me realize how silly it was that I thought that. This is close. If I had the king high flush draw, I'd continue, but I think with the jack high I can just fold. But yeah, it was silly of me to assume so, but I assumed that he would bet with his made hands and check call with like weaker draws. But obviously if he's limping under the gun, and especially now that we see his hand, he's much more likely to be a recreational player who I should read differently, and that's what I was talking about as far as making player assumptions, or the range of players that you're playing against. So given that he limped under the gun, I would say, the range of players I'm playing against is like 95% recreational players, 3% some pros with weird strategies, and 2% sauce. Bottom left table, I could go either way on this flop. Kind of a similar situation where I don't think that I am making many hands like, my hand doesn't need protection. I don't think I'm getting a lot of value when my equity is excellent, and I also don't think that making like the hands that I make fold have very, very little equity against me. I have two backdoors as well, and this is one of the spots where I've been experimenting with checking back and strengthening my check back range, which has its obvious benefits. On this turn, I'm actually gonna the board's draw heavy enough to where he can continue with hands that I'm doing very well against. Top left is a hand I would usually check back, but I'm going to assume people overfold a little bit and just fire out a small c-bet. You can tell, obviously, that's my assumption in these games, and as I have been kind of mindlessly barreling in a lot of spots. Not that we've been through that many hands, but for example, yeah, this hand right here, where it was checked to me in a limp pot, which I opted to limp behind, which I certainly could have isolated. But this is a hand I would hate to get 3-bet, but I think it's good enough to play. Betting in this spot on the flop is by no means mandatory. And against a lot of players, not necessarily a good play. And then betting the turn is pretty reasonable, or I think it's good. With the extra equity picked up, also the overcard. I know that a lot of people assume that it doesn't really translate from no limit to PLO, that an overcard is a good card to bet, but it actually does, because when he has a hand like Jack 10, 7 deuce, for example, the queen makes it such that now if I have queens up, all his 2 pair outs are dead. Whereas if it was a kind of a difference, but like let's say the cards were reversed, queen on the flop, jack on the turn. Now if he has a queen, like fewer of his 2 pair outs may be dead. I mean, obviously if I do have queen jack, actually that means that his 2 pair outs are dead if there are undercards to it. But I think you get what I mean. I'm definitely, it's funny because I've recorded a lot of 2550 Zoom live for tabling, and for whatever reason, I've been able to keep up just fine. Perhaps because and maybe I don't need to, although I feel like we've actually covered some really cool stuff. But for essential videos, I tend to let the hands that play out lead me into tangents that I think are important to consider while playing. But as always, like, I really do enjoy getting feedback, positive and negative. I enjoy the positive a little bit more because I am human. But all of the types of videos I can make, or most of them at least, and the ways in which I make them, it's all the same to me. I just want to make them the way that benefits you guys most. And so if you have some feedback that would help me, accomplish that, then by all means let me know. If you think that this is too hectic, or you think it's great to get that much rambling in one video, let me know. So next time I can keep it in mind. Top left table, this would not be a bad hand to 3-bet, given that we are almost 150 big blinds deep. Because I really don't mind calling a 4-bet at all. I think it plays pretty well. On this flop, I think we have a very easy call. We are doing pretty well against his full range, but by raising, we narrow his range to hands that are doing very well against our hand. So sure, we protect our hand a little bit, but in the process, with a hand like this, that's like a mediocre made hand and a mediocre draw, I really don't want to turn that into a bluff in the same way that I would want to turn a mediocre draw without a mediocre made hand into a bluff, because those are hands that I can't necessarily show down. But this is a hand that has pretty good equity against his flop betting range, even okay equity against his turn barreling range, such that I feel comfortable calling this again, but not great equity once we narrow his range to either like stronger draws and stronger made hands, or one or the other. I would rather keep in his weaker draws and weaker made hands. So I'm going to go for a small bet here. I think it makes the hand a lot easier to play. I think he's going to play pretty honest, although it's the same player. So first of all, he's 2-tabling. Second of all, he has 200 big blinds on 2 tables, which is, a slight indication that he is a more aggressive player, or, a regular, or perhaps a good player. So when he check calls on the top right and I block an ace, he can definitely have some ace X, he can have some king king, he can have some flushes. It's a tough spot now because he definitely expects me to bet in order to rep aces. So for that reason, I think I'm going to give up. I think he's probably going to expect me to barrel quite a bit. I have no flush blockers. I do have an ace blocker, but it doesn't really matter because I expect him to 4-bet most of his aces, so my ace blocker isn't really relevant in terms of, blocking his aces. Gonna go ahead and value bet here, pretty small to make sure all the ace X hands call me, unimproved ones. But I wouldn't hate check and probably have to call, but use his hand as a bluff catcher. I timed out here, but I was going to check, and he did have a flush. And I don't think he would have folded at any point, to be perfectly honest. Top left table, I went with a small c-bet on a paired board, and he calls. I pick up a gutter, but I don't find that people float flops like this very frequently. So I think I'm just going to give up. I think he has some eights, but also a whole lot of overpairs, weak overpairs at that. But probably if the river were a king, I would bluff. King or queen, maybe. I suppose maybe an ace, but it's a little too obvious on an ace, I think. But in this case, even though I'm at the absolute bottom of my range, I'm going to give up because I don't think I rep enough very well. Another kind of important thing about this spot, and this is definitely, exploitative, but I was pretty sure he had an overpair, and for that reason, if I had aces on this river, I would value bet, but in this case, I don't think I can actually rep aces because I don't think people assume you value bet aces or kings here when the 3 pairs as well, and maybe I'm not giving people enough credit, but that's just my assumption. Is that when the 3 pairs, they'll be like, oh, well, I don't know if he'd bet ace again in this spot. So, gonna go for 3 streets on the bottom left. I 3-bet and bet small on the flop, small on the turn. I decided to 3-bet the top left table, which is fine. It's a hand that plays much better in a heads-up pot than a multi-way pot. And I sized down the whole way just because I think it's the way to make the most money. Also, it's not out of the realm of possibility that I'm actually going to check this back, which I'm not in love with because it does cap my range. It lets them know I don't have ace-ace anymore, which, the less information they have, the better. But I have the perfect hand where I'd really like to not narrow his range to only, flush draws and strong made hands. All the hands that I'm making fold are not doing that well against me anyways. Top right hand table could go either way. I'm going to start, the board's draw heavy enough that I'm going to start with a c-bet. I think I can get enough value from his draws. And here on the turn, I'll just start really protection betting with a little side of value. Bottom left table is interesting. It's a board on which you shouldn't c-bet a lot because it's much better for my range than his. And I am going to punish that by raising, and I am going with this hand, so it's really like this is a flop I want to raise a lot, but at the same time, I'm going to need some hands to defend it. So what I'm doing with this hand is raising flop, and if he re-raises, I have a hand that I can shove and punish his bluffs while still having okay equity. I mean, if he has ace-ace-5, I'm still doing fine. What happened here? Raise, and I will c-bet. And here on the top left, I got check raise on the turn, and he's bombing the river, and I think it's a pretty strange spot. What's he repping? The problem is all the straight draws got there, so even if he's bluffing with some kind of club-club combo, it's very hard for him to have air at this point. So I'm going to make a fold that I'm not very happy about. I honestly didn't have to bet the turn, and if there was a mistake in that hand, I don't think checking the flop can be that much of a mistake. I would have called on the top right, but I timed out. I'm sorry, guys. But here, so we'll sit out on that table for the time being. Here, betting the flop would have been fine, and I would say standard-ish, but I have the exact kind of hand that I think doesn't want to bet the flop. One that hates to be check-raised, first of all. Second of all, plays very fine by checking back, has plenty of showdown value, has plenty of outs. I'll make a, reasonable fold on the top left, but you can consider making a move there with middle pair in some way or another. So yeah, does not want to be check raised, has plenty of outs, does not have to fold on any turn against the lead. So this is like the type of hand that I really would like to check back. I also don't need to 3-bet it in the first place, although I think it plays much better, as I said, in a heads-up pot than a multi-way pot. and I think it's a little too good to fold. So maybe 3-bet's the best play. And then flop, I feel pretty good about my play, although it does cap my range. 7 is a card that, you know, when I do check back the flop, I can hit a fair amount with straights. But still, people tend to assume that you have high cards and high pairs when you 3-bet. Come on, you guys. You guys know that I make videos. I was talking to this guy asking why I'm playing this low. Yeah, I think the turn bet is iffy. It's another spot where, like, I don't know, my hand needs a little bit of protection, and so I'm facing a large raise here. The thing about this is I don't need to defend very often to make this an unprofitable bluff. I think he's not bluffing. Both of us can have a queen because the first player already just checked into me, who is the pre-flop raiser. So it's a spot where I'm actually comfortable bet folding kings there. And we could talk about that as well. To be honest, I think that in this video, if I'm reviewing, giving myself a review of my own video, I think we've covered a lot of really good concepts, but I think my play has been a little bit sloppy in the process, just due to the fact that I'm focusing on discussing concepts. I also didn't go into this with as much of a plan as I sometimes do. So when I'm playing a game that's not my normal game, I like to think about, first of all, how I think the regulars, or how I think my competition is going to play that's differently than what I'm used to, and then second, how I'm going to adjust to that. What strategy am I going to kind of take into battle, if you will. And in this case, I didn't really do that. Kind of just went with the straightforward strategy, which is fine. And I think that that's kind of a good way to play against the way I assume these people will generally play. So this guy and I have been battling enough that I think I can just check raise this flop, perhaps get him to stack off with some weaker hands, or get him to raise fold. It's not out of the realm of possibility, which is a phrase that I've already used. My hand certainly needs protection, but can definitely get it in very good on the flop, or very happily on the flop. So I think that's a great way to play it. Against a tough player, who's probably a good player, given how many tables he's playing. I haven't seen him make any mistakes, and he did check raise me on this turn. It can get a little tough when you check raise and they bet call, and then they play well on turns. But I think all in all, the check raise there works pretty well. And I like having it in my range for, like, so that I can widen my value check raise range, and therefore my check raise bluff range. So yeah, this bet of 22 on the turn, I'm doing it as a protection bet. My sizing looks like I'm making a protection bet. And again, I just really don't mind checking back. I know it seems weird, or, you know, going with a larger bet is okay also to get value. It is a little bit of a value bet in that he can have, like, Jack 9, 8, 7 type hands that peel. But yeah, my sizing's been kind of sloppy. I've just been pressing buttons a little bit. So here I decided to check on the bottom left. I think it's probably the best play in a three-way pot when I have no real outs to improve. It's really likely one of them has a king and isn't folding it. My equity against the king is pretty terrible. So I'm not happy, but I'm fine with just check folding this flop. I should have thought a little bit more. I'm definitely autopiloting. So this is a spot on the river on the top left where probably should fire out a bluff. I certainly would have made that hand fold. The reasons that I would fire out a bluff: I have king high, which is towards the bottom of my range on this board run out. I have a jack blocker. My range is not capped, while his certainly is. I could have been going for a flop check raise. I could have been going for a turn check raise. So it's not as if he can't give me credit. Whereas, like, it's even nicer to bluff in spots where you can never be rebluffed, because he's just not going to try to rep 9-9 and raise river. So I don't think that it's just a spot where he can also, because he's repped so much, such capped range, he can assume that I'm value betting very thinly. A hand like king queen here, perhaps. Whether I would do that or not, I'm not sure, because I don't think you get called by many worse hands. But I do think it just, it works out. It works in our favor, or at least that people think we might value bet in those spots when they've capped their range. And yeah, king high is low enough showdown value with a jack blocker in a spot where he's capped that I think I should have definitely bluffed this river. And it's just proof that I need to slow down and think through my decisions, even while I'm talking, which for some reason is giving me trouble today. I don't know why. I've done it all the time. Had quite a bit of practice. But we'll wrap up here pretty soon, and we're just, kind of two-tabling for now. I'm not going to add the third table back. Let's see if we can get in one more interesting hand and perhaps a concept stemming from it. If there were some concepts that I kind of started a train of thought on, lost it, or was interrupted by playing a hand, which I assume there probably were, we could talk about it in the comments section. I would have opened this hand, but with a limper, I don't think it's strong enough. I'm just going to fold 10-8, 6-4. Bottom left table, this is kind of a weak defend in a three-way pot. If it was, if the small blind folded, I would defend for sure. As I think it just doesn't matter as much how weak your hand is when you're taking it heads up. But in a three-way pot, you need a stronger hand, just because when you do flop your weak two pair, your weak draw, you're that much more likely to be dominated. It's going to be very hard to hit a lot of hands that you want to be betting and raising with, and you'll kind of be on the defensive in a multi-way pot with a weaker hand. You'll be on the defensive more often than not in a heads-up pot as well, but when you flop mid-pair and a queen-high flush draw or whatever I had, it's just not all that bad in a heads-up pot, whereas in a multi-way pot, it's much more likely that it's a fine 3-bet, it's also a fine call. It's going to be really opponent-specific. He's actually he looks a little too tight over the 60 hands I have on him, so it's probably bad against him. And we'll start with a small c-bet with my whole range. I do recognize this player from mid-stakes videos that I've made over the years, maybe even some higher stakes as well. So I assume he's a good player. And probably this 3-bet's a mistake against, even though 59 hands is not a lot. Once again, we're playing against a range of players who I know is a good player, or I suspect is a good player from playing with him in videos before, maybe even in real sessions. And then also his stats over 59 hands, so it makes it that much more likely that he's a tighter player, tighter opener in this spot. I am just going to bet fold here. I wouldn't mind calling. I wouldn't mind raising as well, although you don't rep that much. But both plays are relatively cheap given the sizing that he made it. Bottom left table is a spot where I'd very often give up, but I think that people are going to overfold by quite a bit, so I'm okay with betting. But really no good turns for me. This is probably one of the better turns, and I'm still bluffing. Definitely going to continue bluffing though on this turn. His weaker spade draws might have to fold, even though there are a lot of combo draws here. Or I could just hit the nuts on the river. But no, my equity is pretty good on this 10 turn, so I'm definitely fine with firing the second barrel. First barrel was a little bit questionable. And as far as picking a sizing, I think that, if we're going to think about the range of players we're playing against, because we don't know anything about him, I think that it's actually an okay spot to size up a little bit, just because of how often he can have like a 6-8 or jack-8 and never ever fold. As well as, we are repping a narrow value range, so I think it's okay to go ahead and bet a little bit larger. We get check raised, probably we're chopping, but just going to throw in the min raise just in case. And I'll give it a second, like I'm thinking about making a suicidal bluff, or perhaps I have 3 kings in my hand. King 9 8 6 up here on the top left. I think you can go. I think it's just strong enough to defend in position. I don't think it plays very well in a 3-bet pot, so I have to not to 3-bet it. But I think I can get away with calling unless the blinds are exceptionally aggressive. And when he checks to me on this flop, I'm just going to go for 3 streets of value with my second nut flush. And if he raises at some point, then we make a decision. But it looks like he check folds right away, which is probably, you know, it's a fine play with several hands, but I wonder if it's likely that he's doing that because he recognizes my name and thinks that I'm going to play too tough on those boards that are very hard to hit. So we'll, as you can see, I click sit out next big blind, so we'll wrap up. 7, 7, 8, 4, single suited against under the gun. If he had 2.5x that I would call, I think I could probably get away with this call. I don't think that it's necessarily a good call, and so I don't want to say, you know, do as I say, not as I do. So I will fold that for all to see. King 9, 8, 3 is not a hand that I would open on the button in a tough game. It's okay too, but I certainly think I have enough pre-flop fold equity. Like in my games, that just almost never happens, that it goes fold-fold against 2.3x. All right, so an interesting spot on the top left, perhaps. We do have 4x pot with the second nut, so we're not getting away from this hand no matter what. When he checks to us on the flop, I think he's very likely check folding, and for that reason, exploitatively, I am going to check back and see if we can either induce some bluffs or let him hit 2-pair and call us down. Sure, he can check raise, but and sure, he can check call with like a jack high flush, which, you know, if he was doing that and he was going to call 3 streets, then we definitely miss some value. But I'm not worried about giving a free card with this hand, and I do find that people are checking to fold there more often than not. And a lot of times they just fire out the turn bet just because if they have like ace, ace, king, 4, they're like, well, I have equity against 2-pair, I don't want to get bluffed, so I'll just fire out, you know, 65% pot. And gaining that extra 65% pot in a 3-bet pot, you know, at this point, this is a $30 pot, which is 15 big blinds. And if he's going to throw out another 8 big blinds, 9 big blinds, that's going to pad your win rate quite a bit if you can get one of those in every couple hours and eke out that one extra bet from a weak hand. King 7, 7, 4 is an okay hand. If you watch my last Elite video, or perhaps my second to last by the time this comes out, there were a lot of questions in the comments section about preflop decisions, and I'm not I don't claim to be a preflop, especially preflop opening expert, and I do think that as the games get tougher, it's getting more important, but I don't think it's nearly as important as several of the concepts that I talked about today. And please ask me to expand upon any of them that you found interesting, or that I didn't talk about long enough for them to get interesting, or any that you think are wrong, or whatever else. I'm happy to talk more about them in the comment section. I don't apologize for the somewhat sloppy play, because I do think it was, you know, it was kind of the cost of getting into some more overall concepts as I played live, and I think it's still valuable, or hopefully a very valuable video for some of you. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the comment section. This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. Take care, guys.